Despite Mike Norvell's job status, yes, Florida State's recruiting class is really talented.
You are Locked On Seminoles, your daily podcast on the Florida State Seminoles. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Back into Locked On Seminoles. I'm your host, Brian Smith, longtime college football recruiting analyst. Thank you for making Locked On Seminoles your first listen each and every day, right here on the nation's #1 sports broadcasting network, Locked On. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. If you want to be in the middle of the action this season, visit FanDuel.com and place your NFL live bets all season long. We're going to be talking about Florida State's top recruits. They actually have quite a few players that have a chance to make an impact in year 1 and 2. We're going to get to that later on in the show. Signing day drama. It's coming. It's inevitable. Every year it's inevitable. But with all the coaching searches, with all the changes in Florida State, still having Norvell, there'll be a little bit of good and a little bit of bad on National Signing Day. That is my prediction. I'm going to explain why and who else could have some problems on signing day. We'll get into that a little bit later in the show as well. But to begin, Florida State's 2026 recruiting class is talented. There's no way around it. I know Florida State didn't reach the mark that we would all like, but there are a lot of really good athletes in this class and a ton of versatility. I'm going to go through this list one by one and discuss why they're talented, what I've seen on film, what I've seen live from many of these kids, and you can make your own decisions based on that. And if you want, go look at the film. Florida State's class, no doubt about it, is very talented. So without further ado, just going to go quarterback all the way through the offense and then go down to defense. Jaden O'Neal, Mustang, Oklahoma. He's a kid that was committed to the Sooners, was in California, moved out to Oklahoma, flipped his commitment to FSU, but he lives on the edge of Oklahoma City, plays at a really good high school program. I think he's pretty much the consummate in-between quarterback in terms of could be a dual threat guy for you, or it could be a pocket passer. So the scheme you run isn't going to impact him that much. If you brought in more of a pro-style offensive coordinator, there are rumors that possibly Gus, as I do this, it could have changed by the time this airs, but Gus may or may not be there. Who knows? With that being stated, Florida State is going to have a quarterback that can pretty much play in whatever. Big kid, 6'3", 215. He's got a strong arm. He can move around. I think he's a very intriguing prospect. Is he a finished one? No. Does he need a redshirt year like 99.9% of the kids in college football to play quarterback? Of course he does. That's okay. Long-term, this is the kind of player that most major programs want. Has the frame. He has the demeanor. He's a great kid. Very intelligent. And again, he can run and he can throw. That's a great start. Any recruiting class that doesn't have some kind of quarterback presence, it's a little bit iffy. And if it doesn't ring a bell, some of those classes about a half dozen years ago for Florida State, that's what got them in the boat they're in with all the transfer quarterbacks. You have to hit on quarterback. Jaden O'Neal is a good fit. Amari Thomas, what a wild ride. Running back out of Blountstown, Florida, committed to the Noles, lifelong fan. Grew up roughly an hour from campus, 5'10", 180, 190 pounds, twitchy, has some speed. Definitely got a guy that isn't afraid of contact. He's an all-around running back, but he ends up flipping to South Carolina before flipping back to Florida State not that long ago. Very underrated. 2 reasons why. He's in the Panhandle and he's at a small school. Not one or the other, both. He's not going to get a lot of national acclaim, but Amari's a really talented football recruit, and I think he's a guy that can make some noise at FSU. I have no idea what's going to happen at the running back room after this season. They got some guys leaving. I don't know what the circumstance will be with the portal, but he's going to find his way onto the field sooner rather than later. He's one of my favorite players in this class, and I think Amari's a player that any program would be lucky to have. Wide receiver, this is where it gets just flat out buck wild. They got 6 guys. They don't have a boundary receiver, and they have 6 guys. My favorite guy in the class in terms of like a high floor is Jason Lopez, and he could also be the highest ceiling. Tremendous route runner, tremendous hands, loves the craft, and he's got the hand-eye coordination to do pretty much whatever he wants. To that end, he plans on playing hoops for the Noles as well. If you have a chance to play ACC basketball, you're a guy. And he played at Chaminade Madonna, the same program that JoJo, that's at Miami, same program that Jeremiah Smith, that's at Ohio State, and just numerous other guys. Edwin Joseph is at Florida State. He's been around what it's supposed to look like at the high school level. I think that he's going to be a player at Florida State. How quickly, I don't know. He's 5'10", 5'11", strong kid. And again, the hand-eye coordination, the route running, he's going to play. But Devin Carter, the kid out of Douglas County up in Georgia, Ephraim White out of Vero Beach, like the list of kids that they have at the wide receiver position, it's pretty impressive, to be really honest with you. Jonah Winston, yes, that's Jameis's little brother out of Hoover High School on the edge of Birmingham. Brandon Bennett, one of the fastest players in the country. He's a 10-4 kid. He's at American Heritage. And then Darion Williams, a kid out of Tampa Plant. Like they're all a bunch of kids that can play flanker or play in the slot. Let's see which ones end up being the biggest impacts at receiver. And eventually, I think at least one of them's got to move to DB is my guess. But we'll see. Needless to say, Florida State stocked up on a whole bunch of speed at the wide receiver position. Tight end, they did tremendous. They did tremendous. Corbyn Fordham, Todd played at FSU as a lineman. And then Xavier Tiller, flex tight end. You've got two different kinds of guys. Flex as in he cannot just line up out wide. Like he's almost like a receiver. Talking about Xavier. And Fordham's a guy I think you could use an H-back. You could use him as fullback. You could use him in the slot. They didn't get the 6'7", 260-pound kid, but that's okay. Really like this tight end group for the Noles. When we come back, my one concern in this recruiting class is the offensive line. And it's not because of the players that they signed. It's more about the position. What do I mean by that? We're going to talk about it next here on Locked On Seminoles. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. NFL Sundays move fast, one big play, and suddenly everything feels different. That's what makes live betting, and with FanDuel, it can become very exciting. You're not just watching the game, you're reacting to it in real time. With FanDuel, you can place bets as the action unfolds, every drive, every momentum swing, every highlight moment. Live betting is best when the games start to shift. A receiver gets hot, the defense tightens up, or even the momentum flips just with one simple turnover. FanDuel lets you jump in the moment, whatever you want with live betting. Live spreads and money lines also adjust instantly. Player props can be updated. There are a lot of different ways you can do it with live betting. See if you want to be the right in the middle of the action kind of guy. Visit FanDuel.com and place your NFL live bets all season long. FanDuel, the games move fast, and so can you. Thank you once again for making Locked On Seminoles your first listen each and every day right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. I am Brian Smith, longtime college football recruiting analyst. If you have not already, become an everydayer and subscribe to this podcast. We talk transfer portal, recruiting, depth charts, coaching moves, anything that has to do with any movement with the roster or the coaches, certainly what's going to happen next, the ACC, college football playoff, anything you can imagine right here on Locked On Seminoles. Offensive line. They had 3 guys committed, and after losing Deron Parks recently, which was not good news, I was curious what they would end up doing. But to be honest with you, the biggest thing here isn't that they lost Deron Parks. He may have ended up at guard. I think he can play tackle. It's the simple fact that they don't have a 100%, no doubt about it, offensive tackle in this class at all. Considering Florida State's offensive line situation, that is disheartening. It's not for a lack of effort either. Like they brought in a ton of kids for visits, etc. It hasn't worked out. But they got Jacoby Green, local kid, Gadsden County, just on the edge of Tallahassee, just a little bit north. That's a power player. I think he can be a multi-year starter. He'll need a year or two to adjust his body, but live. Jacoby's a good kid. I think they did well. At center, most likely, or possibly guard, or possibly tackle. Like there's all kinds of things depending on who you want to talk to. Michael Ionata is a kid that can play a lot of different spots. The guy that I trust thinks that he's a tackle. But nobody else listening that way except for one of the guys that I know that was close to him that I trust as a trainer. But we'll see. Possibly a swing guy. His dad and I believe his uncle both played at Florida State. And he's got size. He's 6'5 plus. He's 300 pounds. He's out of Calvary Christian. Very good program in Clearwater. I've been over there several times. I'm curious to see how quickly he can acclimate to the program. I think as a redshirt freshman, he might be able to compete for playing time, a little more technically advanced than a lot of kids. And he's not ranked as high as he probably should be either. He's a good player. Stephen Picard, I don't know as much about. I've seen him, but there's so many kids at IMG. It's ridiculous. They just recently flipped him from Syracuse, 6'5", 300 pounds. He's a kid that is from, I believe, the greater Charleston, South Carolina area originally. But those are the three guys, and Picard's an interior player. So two are likely interior. One's a swing guy. They don't have the 6'6", 310-pound offensive tackle, and that's what Florida State needs. Make no mistake, that is a miss for Florida State. But overall, again, the class is very talented, and I like the three guys they got, but there's no true offensive tackle. That means in the 2027 class, flat out, Florida State doesn't need a tackle. They don't need two. They need three. It's going to be a very, very interesting year for Florida State's line recruiting in general, but you just can't ever be in a situation where you need three, and that's where Florida State's going to find itself this next year. On the defensive line, Earnest Rankins is a dude. They've got like 8 different guys that can play it in some capacity, where they're defensive tackle, defensive end. He's listed at like 6'4", but I think he's taller. I've seen him up close out of Southwest DeKalb High School in the greater Atlanta area. Rankins is long. He is powerful. Like Auburn loved him. Georgia and a bunch of other schools went after him. Getting him out of the greater Atlanta area is a coup. One of the best players in the class. Franklin Whitley out of Greenville, South Carolina, defensive lineman, kind of a late addition. He's a really talented player. Another kid with a lot of size, 6'6", 250-something, 260-some pound, depending on where you look. Another guy that fits the profile. Could be in a 3-4 and be a strong side end. He could be a guy that ends up growing and being a nose guard. Who knows? In a 4-3, maybe he can be a power player at 5 tech or move all the way down the nose guard. It's a great problem to have. Take the length, take the size, and smile. Damaad Lewis is probably the kid that I'm most excited about in terms of the young players amongst this group, because I think he's very raw, but he's got a ton of talent. He plays at Myers Park, which also helps. Really good program in Charlotte. You always want to hit the Charlotte area. It is very good. Damaad is a steal for Florida State. They need defensive ends in this class. I think he could be their future strong side defensive end, and he's got some twitch to him as well. Might be able to stay at weak side end. We'll see. Chris Corbyn, this is a really interesting one as well. Another kid that's very athletic. I think Corbyn is a guy that a little bit more well-known than Lewis for whatever reason, but he's at Hillgrove. For those of you who know the Atlanta area, that's a program that usually has some good players. That kid could be a weak side in and be your starter for multiple years. That's a good deal. Hopefully, by the time this airs, it hasn't changed, and it doesn't on signing day. Jalen Anderson, the really athletic kid at Pearl River Junior College down in Poplarville, Mississippi. They sign him. He's a guy I think can come in and start. 6'3", 240, 250, somewhere in that range. That's a really good guy. I know there are a couple other teams trying to flip Jalen. That's a big-time player. We'll see what happens. Judah Daniels, Luke Francis, they're more developmental guys, but they're big-bodied kids. Whitley Cadeau, another kid I like, big body, 6'5", 290, out of Booker T. Washington in Atlanta. Like, Florida State loaded up on D-line. I have no complaints whatsoever. As for linebacker, you got Lavalley, his older brother, obviously. He's already at Florida State. He's an athletic guy. I think Isaiah Williams is – I don't know if he's going to end up being an edge, like that outside stand-up backer if they go back to a 4-3, the pure end. But he's listed as a linebacker. He plays at Tavares High School, just a little bit north of Orlando. Super twitchy guy. We'll see where he goes, but that's a heck of a football player. He had offers from just about everywhere. Karan Maycock out of Miami Central, true inside linebacker. Is he going to be a Will or is he going to be a Mike? I don't know, but he can thump, and he can run well enough to be an impact guy, at least on special teams year one. And I'd imagine year two, he probably in the starting lineup. I like him a lot. Defensive back for Florida State, not surprisingly, it's not as big a need as some of the other spots on this team, but they always seem to get somebody that like makes a difference at defense back, at least in the rankings. And nobody knew until he actually did, because Georgia and a bunch of other schools wanted him. But Chauncey Kennan out of Booker High School, lifelong Florida State fan, he could have went a lot of other places. He's a borderline 5-star guy. Getting him is a nice addition. Darrell Bell III out of Barbara Goldman. It's not a prominent program down in South Florida. That's also a really good kid to grab. He would have been ranked higher if he'd have been at American Heritage or STA or one of those schools. Probably a safety, might be able to play depending on what scheme you go with. You can play some nickel, maybe some corner, but just a good football player. Jordan Crutchfield's a kid I know, big corner, big safety kind of deal. 6'2.5", 6'3", very, very good kid. He's out of Vero Beach, another program. That's where Ephraim White's from. I think Florida State did good to get him. I just don't know exactly where he's going to play. How big does Crutchfield get long term? We'll see, but he's a really talented player. Overall, again, this class is very talented. I'm not disappointed with it from that perspective. My only real concern, they didn't get any offensive tackles unless they add somebody on signing day. And again, full disclosure, I'm doing this podcast on Tuesday night. By the time this airs, it could be different. But they need at minimum somehow to steal a junior college kid. Maybe it's somebody else. They need a couple of tackles really in this class, in every class. But that's the only spot they didn't get somebody in some capacity. Okay, they didn't get a boundary receiver, whatever. But they're in a pretty good spot considering everything that's going on. It shows the power of Florida State. And it shows what getting a good start means. And Florida State did a pretty good job this past offseason, getting kids on campus, January, February. They had a terrible season, and they still had a top 15 class. The power of Florida State football is still relevant. That is also a very important note. Now, when we come back, not just top recruits, but like, what can we expect in terms of impact? What can we expect around the country? Is Florida State trending in the right direction? Is there anything that we need to take moving forward from this class? I'm going to explain that next here on Locked On Seminoles. All right, this is where it gets kind of interesting. It's speculative, but it's honesty. Florida State is not in a circumstance where they're dominating in recruiting by any stretch. But can this class help it immediately in some regards? Sure. A guy like Ephraim White might be your punt returner next year. Who knows? Jaden O'Neal could be your starting quarterback in a year or two. Running back Amari, he's going to find his way on the field somewhere, somehow. Guy like Lavalley, not many people talked about him. His brother is committed to Florida State, signs with Florida State. He ends up here too. Kind of forgotten, but he's a really talented player. There's a lot of guys like that. In addition to the guys like Bennett that can really run, guys like Darion who can really run. Like, they've got speed and talent. We just got to figure out where they go. That's Florida State's class. Fair enough. But what about the competition? Let me throw out a couple of things here. Miami is going to sign the best class in the state of Florida this year. I don't think that's any surprise. But it's not by as much as I thought it was. And again, as I mentioned a minute ago, the power of Florida State, like their D-line class and their receiver class. Two important areas. Florida State's D-line class is very comparable to Miami's. And if you'd have told me that based on the record, like if you'd have told me what FSU's record was going to be, and then told me that, I'd be like, yeah, you probably need to reconsider your thoughts. It's pretty darn good. That gives me a little bit of hope. On that note, I have no idea how Florida's class is going to end tomorrow. Most of those kids have stayed loyal, and they hired a good coach in John Summerall. But I'm curious if any of those guys end up flipping, one of which, Hezzy Kent, could end up at Florida State. I'm not going to go through the full list of guys that I think are possibilities. There's going to be a few others that even the closest to beat writers don't know about because 17-year-olds do weird things. But Florida State's going to flip somebody on signing. I don't know who it is. It's just a lock. It happens every year. If it doesn't, that's sad because most schools do, and they're still trying. I will give the staff credit for that. Overall, in like looking at the ACC and just kind of grazing through some of the classes, Clemson's class did end up being where it needed to be. It's a pretty good start, and at the top end of their class, their first 6 to 8 is really good. Still not where it needs to be overall. Pittsburgh's, they're not there. Boston College, no. The surprise in some ways when you see the name is Virginia Tech, but remember, they just hired James Franklin. He's going to cause a lot of problems in North Carolina, Virginia, and Maryland, greater DC area. That's a team that's going to be on the up. Syracuse, obviously, impressed early on. Not sure, to be honest with you, if that's going to work out long-term for them. They can't get the linemen. They get skill guys, but they don't get the linemen by and large. So I'm not sure how much higher up the rankings they can go in terms of winning games. It's possible, but I think they're probably going to be a team that gets beat up pretty bad in the trenches most games, and that'll be it for them. But they did sign a lot of good skill talent, including Calvin Russell. I mean, he's a depending on which service you want to go by, a 5-star recruit out of Miami Northwestern, and he's a wide receiver at Florida State coveted. That is really unusual. They also got kids from the north part of Florida, the central part of Florida, etc. Congrats to Fran Brown and everybody else on his staff. He did a really nice job. Now, for the ones that I just don't know what's going to happen, Dave Dorn, is he going to retire? What's going to happen with that? Let's see. North Carolina has been hot and cold with recruiting. No idea. Wake Forest, they're done. I just don't think they can get enough talent. I know they've got a good coach, but their NIL isn't where it needs to be. I'm not buying that program at all. I'm not. Louisville's class, it's okay, but it's the same problem. They can't get that next level of player, especially in the trenches, offensive line, to take that next step. And Jeff Brom's a really good coach, but I'm not buying them. And then finally, just kind of looking at the two schools out in California, they're both replacing their coach. Who knows? SMU's made a few moves, by the way, in Dallas, but I still think they're going to have to go portal more than they'd like, but they do have the money to do it. Georgia Tech, they're not spending enough. They're not winning enough battles based on what their season was. I'm a little disappointed in their class too, by the way. Thank you once again for making Locked On Seminoles your first listen each and every day right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'll have a show later today. Don't know exactly what time because these recruits inevitably will change their decision times, or there'll be some news that breaks. Could be something with Gus Malzahn. Probably early evening on Wednesday, I will put up another show. That's my guess. I may have a couple of YouTube shorts, may have a few different things on Locked On Seminoles X page, etc. We'll see how it goes. But thank you once again for checking out Locked On Seminoles. We'll see you again soon.